Welcome back to the Sense of Security podcast. I'm Cassidy Clement, Senior Manager of SEO and Content at Interactive Brokers, and today I'm your host for the podcast. Our guest is Sam Martinelli, Staff Editor at The Fly. The video game industry is quite large. It incorporates other sectors' elements such as semiconductors, computing, advertising, and much more. In this episode, we're going to explore the makeup of the video game sector and how it impacts financial markets. Welcome to the program, Sam.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. So since this is your first episode, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your background in the industry?
Sure. I've been working at The Fly for about 10 years. The way we do things is everyone has to cover a little bit of everything. But some years down the line, I'd say 2017 or 2018, I suggested to my editor that we expand our coverage of the video game industry, given the growth it was experiencing and lots of different trends that I think people want to know about. It certainly helps that video gaming has been a personal interest of mine for basically my entire life. So I do bring some of that background to my writing, to my work.
Yeah, great to hear. I was part of the youth when the Wii came out and it really rocked my world. Animal Crossing and Nintendo Switch kept my social life alive during the pandemic. So I totally understand. But within the past several years, there's been a surge in the video game sector, or the gaming sector. And that's why I wanted to touch on it today, because their sector has been around for many decades, but now more stocks or companies are coming into the limelight, especially in the financial news market. What are some companies that are public or maybe are part of a public company that our listeners may be familiar with?
I always want to start when it comes to a video game with hardware, with Nintendo, Sony, which makes PlayStation, Microsoft, which makes Xbox, and now Microsoft, over the past, I'd say 5-6 years, has really tried to expand its software offerings through acquisitions. Obviously, acquiring Activision Blizzard, that's the biggest one. That's one of the biggest M&A deals in recorded history, but they also acquired Bethesda, which makes Elder Scrolls, Fallout, Doom. So they own a lot of that. So those are the first three stocks I'd like to mention. In terms of third-party publishers, Electronic Arts, obviously everyone knows EA Sports. They also make games like Mass Effect and Dragon Age. Take-Two, they do their own sports games, NBA 2K, WWE 2K, but their biggest asset is Rockstar Games. So Grand Theft Auto 6 is expected to come out this year. That's Take-Two. If you want to know how you can invest in the company that makes Grand Theft Auto 6, which potentially could be a massive hit, everyone's expecting it to be, that's Take-Two. Warner Brothers Discovery has actually been a company that's been on the radar for the last few years, not because they do anything particularly original, but because of the licenses they own. Hogwarts Legacy, a Harry Potter game, came out a couple years ago. It was a monster hit. They also own Batman and all the DC comics. They have a Wonder Woman game in the works, though reportedly that game is it's having some development difficulties, so we'll see what happens there. Then after that, I'd say look internationally. Ubisoft, based in France, they make Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Prince of Persia. They're a bit in flux right now. They haven't had a big hit game in some time and have had some big revenue drops over the last few quarters. And there's been some reporting that they might go do a take-private deal with Tencent involved. So I'd say keep an eye on that. Other big third-party publishers, a lot of them in Japan, Capcom, Square Enix, Sega, Bandai Namco, they make Elden Ring. So if you've heard about people playing Elden Ring, that's a Bandai Namco game. And one company in Poland I want to highlight, CD Projekt, you might spell this project. They make the Witcher games, they make Cyberpunk 2077, but they also own a PC gaming store called GOG.com. So that's a big one. Outside of that, I'd say look to China. Tencent and NetEase are the two of the biggest video game companies on the planet, mostly because of their investments in mobile gaming. But Tencent also owns Riot, which makes League of Legends. They also have a 40% stake in Epic Games, which makes Fortnite. NetEase has been doing partnerships with Blizzard for years, with Diablo and World of Warcraft in China, as well as Marvel Rivals, a big Marvel Comics-based shooter that NetEase has been a part of. So I'd say those, and the last one I'd mention is Roblox, which I'm sure everyone who has kids has had to spend hundreds of dollars and they don't know where it's going every year on Roblox. So it's a game creation kit that seems to be really popular with young kids. So I'd say those are, I know I named a lot of stocks there, a lot of companies, but those are the big ones I have my eye on.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned, we'll say, the youngins in the market, because that's usually how a lot of these companies initially get their exposure. I was a Nintendo kid, and now as a young adult, all of my friends, myself included, were still buying games or buying retro packs or downloadable content. It's still very fun, but the market is so much larger. And all of these are coming into, we'll say, almost behemoth sized financials as well. This isn't necessarily someone just having a game store in the neighborhood anymore and they go, oh, this cool game came out. Let's see how it goes. It's a lot larger than that. And there's a lot more boots on the ground too, as well as people and professionals that have these skills. So this sector is leading into several other places. So from your experience and your research, does this sector's performance come from within or does it hinge on a lot of other sectors, thus making it not as independent anymore? And what I mean by that is video games today and the sector today have integrations with AI, semiconductors, and software development. So is a lot of this going outside of the video game market to fulfill these needs, or is it mainly in-house?
It's a little bit of both. So obviously, every generation of consoles, players are expecting better technology, faster load times, more smooth frame rates, and of course you're going to need to rely on AMD and NVIDIA and Intel to make the chips for that, not to mention lots of overseas manufacturing that needs to be taken into account. One thing that has changed quite a bit is the reliance on physical retail. For example, GameStop, that's a stock that's often in the news not because of how well it's doing as a company. They used to be hub, the big place for everyone to buy games. Now they have more of an online presence. Same with Best Buy. Best Buy doesn't sell physical media as much as they used to. But still, Amazon, Best Buy, all these places have a massive online presence for buying games, or even just buying game codes. You can go on Amazon and buy a digital code for any game. Not any game, but for many games. That's a big part of that. I would say in terms of AI, that's still pretty nascent, obviously, as it is in basically any industry. I know Microsoft just had a press release today announcing that the thing they're calling it Muse, which they're using for development, for what they call game ideation. So if developers want to test out certain features or certain gameplay mechanics, or they said that even a way to improve classic games. I don't actually know if this is going to go anywhere. I don't know. I think it's too early to tell, but it's certainly something that all of these game companies are at least considering. And Microsoft obviously has their own massive plans in AI, so they're going to be the first to try this stuff out. So I'd say, yeah, semiconductors, any kind of manufacturing, retail is something that's changed a lot, but still has an important presence. And AI, I still say remains to be seen, but lots of companies seem very interested in it. Microsoft is one. Square Enix, who makes Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, they've had some comments from CEOs that they've walked it back after some player backlash. So I don't know. It remains to be seen how far that will go, I should say.
Yeah, you mentioned the retail, the brick and mortar element. That kind of leads me to my next question, which is like industry change or industry adaptation. So from your perspective, have you seen any major changes within the industry over the past several years, or something currently that can lead to a larger change in the industry? And my first initial thought is downloadable content. That's a very evident item of I don't have to go to GameStop anymore. When I want to buy Lego Worlds, I hit purchase on my Nintendo Switch. Now I'm an adult. I don't have to go and ask my parents for money to do that. But that used to be part of the wheel and deal of it all. As you would go into a GameStop, look for the game, they'd offer you game protection, all these other things. What elements are you starting to see change the industry or have had major impact in the industry over the past several years?
So on the software side, absolutely. Downloadable content, but also what people call live services or games as a service. Often games that start out as free to play, or sometimes you have to pay some small price ones. Fortnite is the biggest example of this, or one of the most popular, where what's becoming more common, according to a lot of data that I've seen from places like Circana, is players just playing one game basically for years at a time because the game is constantly getting updates. So if you like Fortnite, and that's not like Roblox, that's not just for the kids. Everybody I know plays Fortnite or has played Fortnite at some point. They announce, hey, some character from some famous movie that you like is going to be in Fortnite. Here's a new map. Here's a new event. They've had concerts happen digitally within Fortnite. And so their view is you can start the game and play for free. And every couple of months we'll say, hey, for $25 you get this battle pass that allows you to unlock all these new skins and new characters and new content. And they can do that forever, as long as there's a player base that's willing to pay for it. And now everyone wants to do this with, I would say, extraordinarily mixed results. Obviously, Activision has Call of Duty. They have their premium Call of Duty every year, which they charge $70 for. But they also have Call of Duty Warzone, which is a free-to-play game that also has a massive player base of millions of daily active users. But everyone, except for maybe Nintendo, I guess, everyone wants to have something like that, something that's a cash cow, something that's FIFA. It used to be called FIFA Ultimate Team, where for EA, they would have people spending money to build their own favorite soccer team of players from all over the world and all over different eras. That used to generate $1 billion a year. I don't know if it still does. I'm not as fully caught up on that, but everyone wants to have that, to the point where even Sony, who prides themselves on having really high quality, polished single player games like the Spider-Man games or God of War, now they've invested a lot of money over the last 3-4 years into building their own live service games, and they've mostly been failures, and some of these projects have been canceled already. And so it's difficult to say whether or not this is a sustainable or workable solution for all these companies, but clearly everyone seems to believe that they have to have at least one of these as a way to protect themselves for the future. I would say that's the biggest one. I would say a couple other things to keep in mind are it's more expensive than ever to make these big AAA games, so prices are getting higher. Even Nintendo released a couple years ago their newest Zelda game, Tears of the Kingdom, was $70, and all their other premium games are $60. I'll say subscription services, Nintendo Switch Online, Xbox Game Pass, PS Plus, those are fairly prevalent. They're not cannibalizing sales entirely, but clearly a lot of games do rely on these services to get eyeballs. Microsoft just this week released a new RPG called Avowed, and that's, I'm not saying it's going to sell millions and millions of units, but it certainly has a lot of eyeballs on it. And it's made in-house. So the fact that you can just subscribe for $20 a month or whatever it is and just get this game without having to think about it, that's enticing to a lot of people. The last thing I want to mention is cloud. Cloud gaming is one of those things where it seems to be additive. Google made a big bet a few years ago on Stadia, and that didn't work out for them because it wasn't people owning their own games or hardware or anything. It was you pay $60 for access to a game that you could only play if you have a strong enough internet connection. Whereas Xbox Game Pass, that comes with cloud, so you already can play the games on a console, but you could also play it, you can cloud stream it onto your phone or through an Amazon Fire Stick. Again, the technology is not fully there yet. There's still some input lag, which most of the time doesn't matter, but if you are a competitive Call of Duty player, if you are wanting to win fighting games like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter, that half-second delay might be the difference between winning and losing. So it's hard to say how well adopted that's going to be in the future. I would say those are the biggest. Oh, sorry, I had one more. I know.
By all means, go for it. I have all my notes here. I'm very interested. I'm the customer spending the money on the Nintendo Friends package every year.
Well,
so let us know.
You mentioned Nintendo. They had the biggest change with the last 10 years, a handheld console that can play console desktop quality games. Now everybody wants to do that. I shouldn't say everybody, but Valve, which owns Steam, the biggest PC gaming platform, they released the Steam Deck a few years ago, which can play games like Elden Ring or Baldur's Gate 3 or Call of Duty. I mean, not Call of Duty, but that quality level of game, you can play that anywhere now. A lot of companies are working on not just cloud devices, but Sony released a year or two ago this PlayStation Portal, which is just like a little PlayStation controller with a screen on it where you can stream your games from your console directly to that device. Microsoft has mentioned, Phil Spencer, the CEO of Xbox Gaming, he said that it's a few years away, but they're working on a handheld too. And given Microsoft's investments in cloud, in saying everything is an Xbox, this is an Xbox campaign, that's going to be a big thing to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I was initially thinking about all of the additional items that now bring the revenue directly to either the game creator or the console creator. And that kind of goes back to the GameStop idea, where you would go in, used to get a disc or a card back in the day, and then GameStop would try to upsell you on all these various items, where now, if it's all within their ecosystem, they're able to retain all of that revenue from all of those transactions in that ecosystem. If I want to play a game with my friends, I have to pay for the online friends package. If I want to unlock certain things in games, I have to have other people join the game with me online. It adds up, but I totally understand what you're saying, which is if you only play one or two games a year, that cost is sometimes lower than a brand new game if it's only $25 a year, which is how people justify being super fans of games and buying all of the elements to it and then playing it until their heart's content. What's also interesting is the cost of production and creation in the gaming sector now, also looking at how they rely on other players in the space. What I mean by that is the marketplaces that these take place. And I'm going a little bit back in time when I bring up this point, but I'm sure, I am positive that you remember the Epic and Apple scenario that took place in 2020 to 2023. It may honestly still be happening behind closed doors. I'm not totally sure. But for those of you who don't know, Epic, who owns Fortnite, found a way to allow their gamers, their users, to purchase items within the app without having to trigger Apple's commission. What happens is if you are part of the Apple store, you're technically supposed to pay a certain amount of money to Apple for being listed there, any in-game purchases, and then purchases of the app. And essentially Apple was like, hey, you owe us money. Epic said no. And this is a very truncated version, by the way. But Epic's technology of the Unreal Engine was being used by many other game creators. And Apple was saying, okay, we're going to go for the engine then no one's allowed to have the engine on our space or our marketplace, which can be very detrimental. So that kind of leads me to my next question, which is for people who are looking to invest within the video game space in any capacity, really, when it comes to a financial strategy, what are some things to keep in mind? Because it seems like there's a lot of outside impact nowadays on these companies, a lot more than there used to be. There might be a cultural based interest, like you were talking about, maybe an NFL game, which may be more popular in the United States than Europe, or trends versus a solid company who's bringing out these cash cows consistently. And then, of course, if it's something that's so high processing power or has a lot of, we'll say, like digital token products, is there an environmental impact, something that gets talked about along with crypto? What do you see in this space that are some things people should keep in mind?
I think what people should keep in mind is the big companies, because I said before, they're all relying on live services. How we view their metrics has to change a little bit too. It's not just what are your bookings, what are your sales. You have to think about monthly active users, daily active users, live services revenue. In terms of an outside influence, yeah, the Unreal thing, lots of companies use Unreal. I mean, Microsoft last year announced that they've revamped their Halo studios. Halo's their biggest IP. And now they're going to, instead of using a proprietary engine, which they've been using for over a decade, now they're using Unreal. And they've showed some videos that looks incredible. Same with Unity. They had that big problem where Unity said they were going to charge more for downloads from the creators. And then there was a big hubbub about that, and they rolled it back. But I would say those are things to keep in mind as well. I look at, you mentioned that the cost of these games with the Unreal Engine, these costs are getting higher. They need more people, and I'd say the average game development cycle is longer now than it used to be. So I remember as a kid on the Super Nintendo, I really liked the Donkey Kong Country games. Donkey Kong Country comes out in 1994. Donkey Kong Country 2 comes out in 95. 3 comes out in 96. They have 3 games in the same franchise in 3 straight years, all coming out around the same time with most of the same people working on them. That's unconscionable now. That would never happen now. There's no Avowed, I just said, came out this week. Avowed 2 isn't coming out next year. It's not coming out the year after that either. So as a result, if a company has a high-profile flop, if a game comes out and does not sell well enough, not only is it disaster just because it's that in and of itself is a bad thing, but now they just spent 5 years working on something that they thought maybe 5 years ago there's a big market for this, but you can't possibly predict that 5 years down the line. This was what I mentioned before about a lot of the investments in live services is everyone wants this, right? But now there's more players in the game. There's only so much time everyone has if they already have Fortnite and Apex Legends and Call of Duty Warzone and all these other games. They don't have time for 2 more of these just because someone is making a new one. I also think about, do these games have a tail? Grand Theft Auto 5 came out in 2013 and still was in top 20 sales charts most months. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe came out in the first or second month of the Switch. That's also, same with Animal Crossing. You mentioned that. I was there with you. I was playing Animal Crossing in March 2020 every single day. But it wasn't just that month it sold. It still sells well in America and Japan and Europe. Most of these companies don't have that. Most of these companies don't have that kind of longevity with their games. So if people are thinking about which stocks to invest in, I would say just try to think about what's their software output, what's the cadence, and how well does that still sell years down the line. One last thing you mentioned about environmental impact. Obviously, any kind of manufacturing is going to have a major environmental impact. AI has a major environmental impact. So, as I said before, it's tough to know how much. And just to be clear, generative AI, video games use all kinds of AI and machine learning technology and have for years that are not using large language models. But that's something also to keep an eye on there, I would say.
Yeah, the timing and the longevity portion. Sometimes it's a right place, right time. Others, it may be brand reputation. Mario Kart, I got in 2020. It is now 5 years later, and I just played it last week, mainly because they have the downloadable content, also because I like Nintendo. But there is also a very interesting point of the timing of some of these releases. Nobody really could have predicted when Animal Crossing, I think it's New Horizons, was being developed, that a global pandemic was going to occur when it rolled out. And their in-game economic structure, similar to that of the US stock market, is based in turnips. And it was starting to replicate, people were starting to create technical analysis charts on turnip prices for this game. Yes, gamers were very bored in March of 2020. That is what you all are learning today.
Well,
but
I want to add one thing on that as well. That actually resulted in a massive explosion in video game spending, COVID, in 2020 and 2021. Because it wasn't just people like me who were playing these games anyway. It's people I knew who would buy a Switch because they just had nothing better to do. They were sitting at home. And then as the years have gone on and things have normalized a little bit, you're seeing a steady decline. It did also certainly help that the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X both came out in 2020. So the new console honeymoon was over. The COVID spending is over. So that's resulted in a lot of layoffs across the board. And that includes we're seeing it everywhere in America. There's lots of companies having layoffs, but with video games, I think in 2024, like every single week, there was some massive announcement from big company that they needed to let go 10, 20, 30, hundreds of people. Microsoft laid off over 1,000 after the Activision Blizzard integration. So that kind of investment doesn't last, and these developers couldn't have possibly known how long it was going to last.
Absolutely. And the console prices also have significantly gone up. Initially, a big thing that I recall from my childhood, and I still see usually now, not as frequently this past year, but between the Santa Claus rally window of October to January, you normally see a lot of game combo bundles. And those aren't as prevalent because the cost is higher now. And they have to try to get you to buy in for the console to then buy those other things. So those items aren't as, I guess you could say, advantageous for the manufacturer or the creator anymore, which is unfortunate because they're still there. I guess I could just say they weren't as pushed this year as I've seen in other years. I have a background in marketing, so I'm always looking at the ads and trying to decipher why was this created this way and who is this tailored to? But this sector specifically is very interesting because it's also sometimes used now. Certain games are used, or game engines are used to train people in jobs like simulations and all of things
Unity
like
is
that.
used a lot for that. Unity, I know a lot of people who use Unity for various work.
Yeah, flight simulation, surgery simulation, so many different things. And it's very interesting to see what way this market is going, because it truly puts its hand in every technological basket. And it also is an interesting thing because it has a social aspect that brings the companies into different ebbs and flows. So it was awesome having you today, Sam. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Great. So as always, listeners can learn more about an array of financial topics for free at interactivebrokers.com/campus. Follow us on your favorite podcast network and feel free to leave us a rating or review. Thanks for listening, everyone.
The analysis in this material is provided for information only and is not and should not be construed as an offer to sell or the solicitation of an offer to buy any security. To the extent that this material discusses general market activity, industry, or sector trends, or other broad-based economic or political conditions, it should not be construed as research or investment advice. To the extent that it includes references to specific securities, commodities, currencies, or other instruments, those references do not constitute a recommendation by IBKR to buy, sell, or hold such investments. This material does not and is not intended to take into account the particular financial conditions, investment objectives, or requirements of individual customers. Before acting on this material, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances, and, as necessary, seek professional advice.